Hey everybody, welcome back to Backlog Banter. Today we're jumping right into the fucking thick of things, if you will, by reviewing a game that came out 7 whole years ago.
Yeah, I know.
In Backlog Banter's constant effort to be topical, we've gone back to the well to play a Zelda game that has no relation to Breath of the Wild, no relation to Age of Calamity. If you want to hear us talk about that game for a little bit more topical content, card in the corner. But what we're talking about today is the sequel to a game we discussed very recently.
hmm
And the card to that will probably be in the corner too. Now we haven't posted that. We're in this weird temporal state, almost as though we're in between a light and a dark world where I don't know what content's uploaded, what isn't uploaded, when something's being uploaded, but the fact is it doesn't matter. And
hmm
the reason it doesn't matter is because we're here to talk about what I think is a wonderful video game.
I
And that
agree.
is The Legend of Zelda Link Between Worlds. Now, Tucker,
Yes.
let's call a fucking shovel a hoe, if you will,
Uh-huh.
and let's discuss the fact that you played this game right on the heels of A Link to the Past.
Hours after.
Hours, right?
No, minutes. I don't even remember. It was not very long after I finished it where I was like, you know
Sure.
what? Screw it. I'm hopping right in. Because I like to do this thing where I'm sometimes spontaneous. Where I'm like, wouldn't it be funny if I would be some spontaneous? And then I do it and I'm like, huh, I did it and it wasn't that crazy. Because
Sure.
usually the thing that in my head is crazy is just doing something average. But to me, jumping straight into Link Between Worlds right after being Link to the Past was just a bonkers. And I did it. I beat that game in 4 days. I played 17 hours in 4 days, and I had a hell of a time. Our Link to the Past video. I'm very tired today, guys, but I am excited to talk about Zelda. Our Link to the Past video, most of that was talking about the fact that I hadn't played much Zelda before, and I was unfamiliar with the formula. But this one, I'm a little more familiar with it because I've played two traditional Zelda games now in the span of a week. So yeah, this is definitely gonna be a little bit more about the game itself rather than the series as a whole, or like formulas, things like that.
See, this is why we need to contextualize this discussion because I haven't played this game in 6 years.
Mm.
I got it in March. It came out holiday of 2013, but I got it March of 2014 on a trip to Florida. Put on my way to Orlando. Big sessions of that game. Fucking adored it. It is my third favorite Zelda game of all time, behind Wind Waker and Breath of the Wild.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I played this game before I played Link to the Past. So
Yes,
that's important context. It's important to know the fucking different avenues we're intersecting on for this
quite
fucking
different ones.
discussion. Quite different
Temporally,
avenues.
Zelda Lee.
Geographically,
Yeah,
Zelda Lily, Tingly. I mean, I'm
yeah,
tingly whenever we record a
of
video, but
course.
sure. But Tucker, I really want you to fucking take the reins on this one. I want you to begin us where you
Uh
want to begin.
oh. Okay.
Because you have
Well,
notes.
why not begin as all great stories do at the beginning? And by which I mean, A Link Between Worlds is a very interesting game that I knew only a little bit about going in. I think I had like put it in my DS once before because I've had the cartridge for Link Between Worlds for a while. But I didn't know anything about Zelda series. I didn't know that this was a game that was based on another one until more recently. I didn't know that it was sort of a sequel. I didn't know it was sort of a remake. It's definitely one of the most interesting new Nintendo games in terms of how it places itself in terms of retro versus new and stuff like that. And I think that that's an interesting topic.
That is very interesting because, like I said, I played that game before Link to the Past and now have been completed Link to the Past very recently. I no longer really know if I would consider it to be a sequel or a remake or somewhere in the middle because it's strange the way it uses the same map but introduces so many of its own ideas.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that it exists in that space between spaces gives it a strange identity. I don't think it's nearly as unique as a lot of the Zelda games that surround it,
hmm
but I certainly think that pound for pound, it is one of the best in the series.
Well, the thing that you mentioned about it being, sort of an in between, a crossover between worlds, if you will, is thematically appropriate to the fact that you transition between low roll and high roll in this game. Which is I just wanted to make that tangent, but well, we're on a shutdown. Gonna shut up for a second.
You're
Hello.
back.
All
You're
right,
back
we're
for the
back.
middle, but we're about to be gone again, aren't we?
Uh huh.
Any second now.
I just wanted to leave him with a face like that.
For that actually.
All right, we're back.
Okay.
Um, shit, I forgot where I was going with
Well,
this.
here's what you
But
were saying, low roll and high roll. I think
yes,
this is a good place to talk about perhaps the game's central gimmick,
yeah.
which is Hopping fucking from the 3D to the 2D, going on those walls, slithering into the fucking cracks in the wall, you know what I'm saying?
Yep,
Slithering
yep.
into low rule through the
Yeah.
fucking holes. And I have
Hmm.
to say, I think this is part of what makes the game so strong is the fact that its central gimmick, I feel, is the least obtrusive and most engaging central gimmick in any Zelda game, 2D or 3D.
Yeah, well, clearly I can't really comment on that because I've played
Yeah,
an open-ended Zelda game, a traditional Zelda game, and now this is my first real gimmick Zelda game.
yeah.
Um, but I really did enjoy it. It was something that I had a hard time wrapping my head around, considering I
Hmm.
had just hopped from the predecessor to this. Um, is that I was familiar with the map and I knew where things would go and I knew vague ideas of where I should find items or characters or things like that. But when I would enter a dungeon and notice a room that I remembered from Link to the Past, and then I would just be slamming my head against the wall, like not turn into a painting because I would forget that the painting option was really viable. But I think that is a sign of a good puzzle, and it really makes you critically think on a different level about your environment. This game takes the environment, and while it's still technically 2D, it adds another dimension to it, which is not something that a lot of games can do. In some ways, this reminds me a lot of the game Fez, which I don't know if you've played,
I do not,
but
but I'm very familiar.
yeah, it's a 2D game that essentially takes place in a 3D environment, and that sort of critical thinking about sides of platforms or perspective is something that I think I really enjoyed. And well, honestly, to me, the wall melding gimmick, whatever you want to call it, was not necessarily one of the my favorite things about the game. I still think it definitely helped give it its own flavor in a way that I think people don't give this game credit for enough. I've been listening to a few reviews and discussions of this, and people are mostly like, "Oh, it's just sort of a normal Zelda game that's just based really heavily and it doesn't really have its own identity." But I don't even necessarily think that's true because there's so many things that it does change in terms of, uh, in my opinion, far superior story, updated mechanics, a smoother progression system, and of course, its gimmick. But I definitely do think it has its own identity.
Here's what I think is important about its identity, and I think important about the way people talk about this game. A lot of people contextualize it rightfully so as being a sequel or quasi remake of A Link to the Past.
Yeah.
But I think it's more important to contextualize it as the last Zelda game, the last new Zelda game before Breath of the Wild. And the reason I think that's important is because this game is a lot more non-linear and a lot more explorative than the
Hmm.
series has ever been, and it does so in the context of a traditional Zelda experience where Breath of the Wild harkens back to Zelda NES and creates its own sort of almost action RPG, open world action RPGs found on the genre and the series.
Yeah.
Link Between Worlds has that non-linearity and that player agency that Breath of the Wild does, but it does that in the context of what people love about the series: the dungeons, the itemized progression, the finding the heart pieces, finding the Malamar. What are they? I want to say Malamar, but I'm pretty sure
My
it's a food.
Mice.
My. See, that's the thing
Malamar's a
I'm putting.
Pokemon.
No, that's Magmar.
No,
Malam.
Malamar is also a Pokemon.
No, Malamar.
No, I'm not. I'm not fucking with you. It evolves from Inkay. It was introduced in Kalos. Malamar is a Pokemon.
But it's also
Calamari is the food that
no. Here we go.
it's not.
Malamar food.
It's not a fucking food.
Yeah, it's a cookie.
A Malamar
A Malamar cookie. Yes.
spelled the
Yes.
same as the Pokemon name.
Mallomar.
Oh, Malomar.
Malamar. It's a
Fuck you. All right. Well, back to Zelda. From that odd tangent. Jesus Christ. I don't even remember where we were.
We were
Oh,
talking
one,
about
one
the.
thing that you mentioned, I do actually remember.
Yes.
Um,
Go for
one
it.
of the things you mentioned is the itemized progression of this game and also the sense of freedom. The itemized progression, I don't actually agree with that because this game, one of my biggest criticisms about this game, one of my few major criticisms about this game, and this is can be balanced as a positive or negative in terms of being its own flavor, but me not personally enjoying it, is the fact that you rent all your items from Ravio. And while you do have the option to buy them, which I think is great and sort of negates a little bit of my issues, it does make exploration feel slightly less rewarding because if you're in a dungeon and you find a chest, 95% of the time it's going to be a fucking 5 rupee or a single monster guts, both of
Yeah.
which you can get by killing enemies, which means chests don't really matter. Really, the only interesting thing you're looking for in chests in this game is small keys, big keys, and compasses, whatever. And that loss of the discovery of items in the world, while I still was compelled to explore the world to find new transition points between Lower and Hyrule, to find the Mai, which I collected all 100 Mai. I loved exploring. I completely explored the entire world on both ends. But the loss of that itemized progression through finding items in dungeons and finding the extra hidden items in extra areas, things like that. That definitely was a loss in my opinion.
Here's what I'll say to that, because I think that's fair. But what I think it does for me that I like is it breaks some of the monotony of getting a new item and then all of a sudden the game is completely contextualized around that item for a while.
Sure, yeah,
Um, and what it does is it allows you to have the more because I think a problem with Breath of the Wild's exploration is it felt so open-ended that items felt useless in a lot of senses because everything had multiple solutions. Everything was designed so if you don't have X, you can solve the thing with Y. And
yeah,
part of the fun of Zelda is the way that the development team has always crafted challenges specifically around the hook shot or around
yeah,
the
sure,
fire rod or the sand rod or whatever. And that was fun, but it would reach a point of stagnation where, okay, here's a new item. We're going to solve puzzles only with this new item. And then you're going to get another item, solve a new type of
yeah,
puzzle.
sure.
By giving you all of those items centrally, you still had the fun of item tailored puzzles outside of the context of something that felt so restrictive in the sense that, okay, now we're into the fucking hookshot happy hour.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying?
of course. And honestly, you make a very good point. And that was something I was considering beforehand and saying, like, that does help give it its own flavor. But I also do think it does help the game in terms of its structure, which is pretty antithetical to A Link to the Past. In which, when we recorded our discussion of that a few days ago, one of the things that I think both of us kind of talked about was the fact that it gave you some sort of quasi freedom. You couldn't really go to the dungeons in any order, but you sort of could. But this one completely strips that back. I think there might be one example where you can't go to a dungeon first. I think the Sand Palace you have to get the guy who has a sand rod first. So that's I think you unless I'm wrong, there might be another way to get it. But as far as I know, most of the dungeons you can go to in any order, and obviously having access to all the items allows that to be possible. But I think well, my point was earlier is that I prefer the
Yeah.
satisfaction of discovering a new item. That was one of my favorite aspects of A Link to the Past. So not having that here was a middling point for me. But
I
also I
can't
think yeah,
I was just
actually
gonna say, I can't wait until you get into the 3D Zelda games and you get the big fucking grand animation where Link opens a chest and throws himself in and it goes da 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 da. You know what I'm saying? You're gonna be
hmm
so excited. I
okay.
want I want a fucking full body cam to see which parts of your body react the most
hmm
viscerally to fucking finding something in the chest.
Yeah.
But you're definitely right. It I think telegraphed in some ways the way that Breath of the Wild is going to handle its exploration in the context of a more traditional game. And it's interesting to me to see how many strides the Zelda team did decide to take
Yeah.
uh, in the context of what is considered by many to not only be the most beloved Zelda game, but one of Nintendo's most beloved games, period.
Yeah.
And I thought it was refreshing for them to look at their work with a little bit of a finer tooth comb because, like I was saying in our Link to the Past discussion, I took issue with the game in terms of movement, and I know we differ here, so I think we should talk about this in terms of
Yeah.
movement, in terms of game feel. But here, taking Link off of his axis, giving him a more organic control in the world, for me, gave me a
hmm
level of precision I didn't have before and made me connect with the world more. But I know that wasn't how you felt about things.
Well, I think that what I mentioned this in our like the past video is that I was having issues with the movement in some way, in small ways, granted, but in some ways with Link Between Worlds. Namely, when you have to do really fast challenges, there's these
Hmm.
mini challenge dungeons. The 8-axis directional thing can fuck you over majorly. If you have the fucking circle pad tilted 2 degrees, it'll set you to the diagonal, even if we don't want to. So I was having problems aiming the hook shot properly, especially when I had to do it really fast. Using the Pegasus boots to turn sharp around corners because I would just zip off in a direction that I didn't mean to, because it doesn't have, you don't have full control.
Yeah.
It's only 8 directions, so it's sort of a middle ground that I don't think necessarily helped me in terms of game feel, and I didn't have issues with the game feel of Link to the Past, but I definitely do think it was a good idea for them to upgrade it. I'm glad that it wasn't locked to 4 directions. That would have felt archaic, but I did find a few times that I had problems with it.
I think part of what helped me was also the hitboxes a little bit more generous. I found them very particular in Link to the Past, but I felt I was able to make connections a little bit more here. And
Sure,
it just, those kind of things alleviate some of the more frustrating elements inherent to any game. If you can, as soon as those fundamentals are nailed, I'm way more engaged to figure out a puzzle. My head's being banged against it because I can't figure it out or anything. You know
sure,
what I'm
yeah.
saying? Hitting those very basic marks for me is a big deal, and I felt that was better in Link Between Worlds, of course, because it's a newer game, more development experience under the fucking Zelda team's belt and everything.
Hmm.
Um, but I really just find this game to be a wonderful improvement and iteration upon what came before it.
Yeah. I want to mention one other thing that sort of frustrated me, but this is not very huge. Is going off of the fact that the game is more open ended, so it loses a little bit of the progression that I enjoyed in Link to the Past. Was that there's a lot less bombable walls in this game. There's a lot less to sort of pay attention in the environment for, and that kind of gave me a little bit less exploration satisfaction, and also it's a little bit less satisfying to get upgrades, like when you get the nice versions of the items from the Mother Mai Mai, because you can just rent the items.
Hmm.
So it sort of loses that you're really getting more powerful, because you can kind of just, you can either lose it all right away if you're renting it, or and you can just go and get it back. But that's not a huge deal. And overall, I think we can get into the section where I just give my glowing review of this game.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, as I said, the my collecting. I'm a collector. I'm a collecting fella. All right, and I really, really, really enjoyed how the my were scattered around the map. How the map had little areas that told you how many are in each area, but it doesn't get to tell you exactly where. I think the idea of having them make a little chirping noise is really cool, because it allows them to be more hidden, and that sort of helps eliminate the fact that there was less bombable walls or areas to explore, because you're always on the lookout for a little chirping noise, or, oh, I see one up on the wall, or inside this building. How do I get in there? Do I have to use the transition between the light world and dark world, or shit, low roll and high roll, But I really enjoyed that, and the satisfaction of collecting all 100 and getting the great spin of getting every 10, traveling back to Mother Mai Mai and putting them in. You get this grand animation of her fucking performing fellatio on your inventory and spitting it back out, nice and improved. But that definitely helped me in the exploration. And another aspect that was vastly improved over Link to the Past for me was the transition between low roll and high roll, comparatively to using the magic mirror for light world and dark world. Having there be specific points in the environment which not only help the world feel better designed, like, okay, if this is here, I can help compare it better to, like, it feels more like a flip side, because there's things anchoring the two worlds together. And also, just because I had so much problems with using the magic mirror at A Link to the Past, I don't even think we touched on that in a review, which was a bad thing, because we definitely had conversations about that. Magic mirror can be frustrating to use. It doesn't work in some situations, but when you can just see, oh, hey, there's a portal crack on the wall, I need to go through this, and then you can wrap your mind around that and combine that with, there's a verticality to some of the maps where you have to be on a certain level, because once you're in a wall, you can only go horizontally on that layer. I honestly, I really, really enjoyed that, and it helped eliminate one of my major issues with the past.
I mean, that all sounds great to me. I'm really kind of letting you sit back and no, I'm letting. Hold on. My mind's in fucking different planes of existence right now. All I want to say so far is that the Malamaris, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
add what I think is a more organic and incentivized way to explore the world opposed to the Korok seeds to continue to look at the way that this game moves the series forward instead of how it
Yeah,
looks backwards. I think it takes the same principle but makes them feel more organically woven into the world, which is really nice. And like you were saying, I think having the high rule, low rule connection. First of all, I only literally only days ago realized that it's high and low. I should have realized
yeah,
that.
yeah,
Um, but it does feel very nice. It feels a little bit more thematically connected. There's no random chance you're gonna turn into a rabbit. There's no fucking weird rules about teleporting NPCs back through the fucking dark world to light world and everything. It really the game streamlines its own systems and thinks critically about what its predecessors did right and how it can be improved. I think
yeah.
in engaging in smart ways.
Yeah, and you know that is an interesting point that I want to build off of. Is this game is more significantly more thematically coherent, as we talked about in our review. Link to the Past is more of a baseline Zelda game that other things were built off of, which doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, but it doesn't really have its own flavor now that we know where the series has grown since then. But this game takes that baseline formula and really does give it its own identity. As someone who is not particularly familiar with the Zelda franchise overall, that it was fun to go from a baseline one to something with a little more pizzazz. You know, thematically appropriate in terms of the light world and dark world having Hilda and Zelda being counterparts of each other, which mirrors high rule, low rule, and obviously spoilers. Ravio is Link's counterpart, low rule counterpart. But other than that, the story I feel like is a lot better. It's not incredible. It's not ground shaking, but the fact that you are able to make connections to some of these characters, you have Irene, you have Gully, you have Impa, these characters that are the seven sages that you're going to be going around and collecting. One of the issues that I had with A Link to the Past was that when you enter the dark world and you go around collecting the seven crystal ladies, you don't give a shit about them. They're just pixelated blobs. They don't have personality. Most of them don't have names, and most of the characters in A Link to the Past don't have names. So that's definitely something they fixed here. There's a lot of more characters. There's some that are just blacksmith or captain, but there are plenty more like Gramps, like Maple, like Irene, like as I said, Gully and Impa that have a lot more personality, a lot more connection to the story, and it definitely made me want to explore the world more and want to dig more into the lore, which is not very deep, but it's still there. And that's one of my favorite improvements over Link to the Past, because I was just so disengaged with the world because it was just mundane Zelda. But this gives it a little twist that I think really helped me connect to it.
Yeah, I think it does a nice job taking almost what feels like the quintessential Zelda aesthetic
Hmm.
and giving it a little bit more weight behind it. I still prefer the aesthetics of a Wind Waker, not only visually but in terms of the characters and the storyline and things like that. I think other Zelda games do a better job overall, but this does a nice job taking essentially in the sense like a pejorative, but it's not like the new Super Mario Brothers aesthetic for Mario, but for Zelda and fleshing it out a little bit better.
Sure, yeah. And that's something that I've heard criticized about this game a lot, is the visual style. People saying it wasn't, it's not very interesting.
I
But
disagree.
honestly, yeah, I think it's fine. I think that the characters are well animated, especially in cutscenes. I think they have, nice facial expressions. It definitely gives it more personality. Um, but the last thing I wanted to talk about for me was just the improvement of the dungeons. Because as I talked about in our other, I keep referencing that, but I mean, look, we're talking about the remake sequel of a game. Of course, we're going to be referring back to the original. Is that the Link to the Past? I didn't really connect to many of the dungeons because they were relatively simplistic. They had one idea that sort of just carried through, and they weren't very memorable. But I do think that this game goes a lot further in not only giving those basic themes that are ice, that are darkness or whatever, and in expanding on those, but giving its own twist in combining them with the wall climbing, wall merging mechanic.
Yeah.
Um, I yeah, and it also it makes them more expansive because they are 3D, and it's not just a texture that you go a little bit slower on. That's a staircase. It is, you can drop down multiple floors. You have to think of it critically in terms of, there's a hole in the floor here. I can see down there now. It's not just a black hole. I'm not going to just turn into a little pixelated dust and fall down. But I definitely really enjoy the dungeons a lot more in this, especially the boss fights are a lot more memorable in this one than they were in A Link to the Past, in my opinion. Um, yeah, I mean, I really like also the fact that they gave the entries into the dungeons a little more character. The main one that comes to mind is the darkness dungeon, the stealth dungeon in the Eastern Palace in the dark in Laurel. God damn, in Laurel, you have to do this whole stealth section where you sneak by the walls behind vines, out of people's views, and then you get into the dungeon. So there's like a area outside of the dungeon that has its own flavor and gives a better context to the fact that as soon as you get in there, it's continuing that theme of darkness and stealth, and everything is in shadow, and you have to use light in a certain way where if the torch is off you can see the floor but you can't see enemies or walls. And it honestly, I very much enjoyed how much they improved the character and personality of the dungeons, which are the main aspect of this game.
Yeah. I just think that this game overall is one of the most polished games that the Zelda team has put out. Frankly, I think it's one of the best games Nintendo's ever produced.
Oh,
I
yeah,
I really think that it stands as probably the pinnacle of 2D Zelda.
sure.
Um, and it makes me really interested for when I finally crack you and make you buy the Link's Awakening remake, and
Hmm.
so we can discuss that, because I think that's going to be really interesting
It'll happen
uh,
eventually.
to talk about and contextualize in light of this game. But that's basically all I have to say, because I'm really most interested in your perspective, because you're new to Zelda, which is
Hmm.
which is just a simply wild concept.
Uh-huh.
But that's all I really want to say. It's an incredible game, and if people haven't played it for some reason, I bet you have if you're listening to this video. But certainly go play it.
Yeah,
Certainly go play it.
it really is a game that deserves the overall experience. And I'm honestly surprised I don't hear more people talking about it. As someone who looking in from the outside, who has been a Nintendo fan forever and thinks, not necessarily positive about it, but I think I know a lot about Nintendo and the community as a whole. But I hear more people talk about Ocarina. People talk about Wind Waker. People talk about Breath of the Wild. People talk about Link to the Past. But as far as I know, Link Between Worlds kind of gets short shrift in terms of its popularity, in terms of its connection to the community. And I think that's a bad thing. I really want more people to talk about this game. And I hope if you're watching this video and you go play the game, tell me, holy shit, that would be amazing if we spurred you on to play the game.
Yeah.
Um, Make more Link Between Worlds content, guys. I know it's a 7-year-old game, but you know what? Do it anyway. We're setting an example. We, as the
Yeah,
arbiters of
Alpha
taste.
Rad.
Yeah, we're talking to you.
Talking to you, Alpha Rad.
Okay. Well, I'm done. I said my piece.
Guys, I don't want to fucking drop a spoiler on you right here, but all I'm gonna say is you're gonna want to tune in next time for when we talk about fucking Link's crossbow training, because it's gonna be a
Oh
goddamn good
my god.
video.
Oh my god.
But yeah, I mean, I'm done too. Uh, keep an eye out for our Link's crossbow training content coming in the pipeline very shortly.
Hmm.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for listening. We're almost at 100 subscribers.
We
I
are.
I pitched I pitched a 100 subscriber special to Tucker today,
What
and
did I
before
respond to that with? Something crazy. Something.
you said, I think you just said, "Oh fuck," and then I responded with an incendiary comment about Mr. Potato Head. Then we stopped talking about my
That's
idea.
true. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that now. Okay. Well, thank you very much for watching, everyone.
I'll see you next time.
Oh,
Much closeness.
there's too much sexual tension.
There's always too much sexual ascension and backlog banter. God of War sexual ascension.